So Richard Satchwell was sentenced to life today, but he stuck with his plan, which he's had all along, which was really to accept very little responsibility. And even in court today, when Tina's family were there to give the victim impact statements, they're already hit with his vow to appeal his sentence.
Yeah, so I mean, like the way it kind of worked initially, there was a recap of the trial, which always happens at all sentence hearings in kind of from circuit court up, where the prosecution kind of leads guard a witness. In this case, again, it was the detective David Kelleher, who's been on the box throughout, in the witness box throughout the whole trial over what's now I suppose the sixth week, and then there was two very moving victim impact statements from her sister Lorraine and from her cousin Sarah Howard. But then when it was turned for Brendan Graham, the defence counsel, to address the court, he just very kind of briefly said, look, they had a chance to take instructions from Mr. Satchwell today, and that he wanted to point out that he intends to appeal the verdict, the unanimous jury verdict against him last week, and that he never intended to kill Tina, and that she was a lovely person.
I mean, he did, it's a bizarre sort of way to approach it. Like we've seen in other cases, even where people have pled not guilty, and then when it comes to the verdict, people can say stuff like they accept the verdict of the jury and they can apologise. I mean, Satchwell clearly is not going to go that route. And obviously it must be very hard for a family as they've gone through a trial like this. They've gone through harrowing evidence. They've heard Tina's character being pulled apart really to suit Richard Satchwell's ends, and they have to now hear that he's going to appeal it straight away. I mean, have Tina's family? They haven't been there the whole time, have they? Or they've been.
They haven't been there the whole time, but they've been there a lot for the most part of it. And certainly they spoke about the impact that had on them.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that kind of struck me from Sarah Howard's victim impact statement was that it's still causing them heartbreak and anguish, and that it's not something that happened to them in the past. It's something that they're living with. And like she like in the part of her statement where she says, listen to all the lies in court was very hard, and knowing now all the horrible things that were done to her, being wrapped in a piece of plastic and buried in such an undignified way caused me huge amounts of distress. It's still hurting them. Yeah. And Lorraine reflected that in that they were saying, like, as a family, they didn't expect the actual physical toll it would have, and particularly on their mother, Mary Collins, and that seeing a woman that was put through with so much pain was almost unbearable to watch. And she singled out the fact that her brother's name, her brother Tom, and his name being brought up and suicide being brought up because of this is part of Richard Satchwell's bogus narrative that Tina had become depressed and her behaviour and her mood had changed because of this. And they said that made an already horrendous situation worse. And, watching it being used to help the defence was like pouring salt into an open wound. It's intolerable for me, my mother, my children and extended family. So that they both give an insight that it's not something that's now been folded up and packed away and it's gone forever. This is something they're going to have to continue to live with. Us in the media, we're going to move on to other things. We're going to kind of have another story this time next week or further down the line. But for them, for the Dingiven family, for Tina's relatives, this is something that's ongoing. It's present tense. It's not something that they have filed away, never to be opened again.
Yeah, and also Tina's sister spoke, I think, about how they hadn't been speaking just in the run-up to her death, and that obviously then she's murdered. And she spoke about how she knew that they would have reconciled, but that opportunity clearly is taken away from her by Satchwell.
Yeah, and she said that she knew that they would have made up, become best of friends again. She didn't want to go into the reasons why they had the falling out, which she didn't do in court either, in fairness to her. But she said Richard Satchwell stole that from them, but he also stole that from many people before that. He even murdered Tina by isolating her and alienating her from many friends and family when she was alive. So he pushed this whole kind of idea that she was violent and coercive towards him, and she says that couldn't be further from the truth, and she was very thankful that the jury could see through his lies and found him guilty, as she put it, this despicable crime. And, you know, again, they talk about the kind of the loss that, like, we'll never again get to be sisters. He stole an aunt from my kids. We never got to meet Tina. And I know she would have loved her goddaughter, because so much of their shared characteristics and their love of animals and fashion that she thinks they would have really got on. You know, so all the gruesome details as well was something, you know, that really has affected them. And Lorraine mentioned that, you know, having you know, hours sitting through the evidence of the various media interviews and the guard interviews, as she put it, was mentally draining. And she said, as a result, she can't sleep and eat. She keeps waking out of her sleep, having nightmares over Tina's final moments, thinking about what my poor sister went through, the appalling way my sister was buried, wrapped in plastic beneath the soil, and concrete runs shivers down my spine every time I think about it. So, you know, it really brings home the loss and the pain that they are still suffering, that it's not over.
Of course, like when you think about it there and you hear them describe how the impact of hearing how Tina was buried and knowing how she was buried, I mean, it marks a stark contrast with Richard Satchwell's behaviour in the aftermath of that, because, of course, he did interviews, including with the Sunday World. Our colleague Alan Sherry wrote about interviewing him in the months after Tina disappeared, or now we know was murdered. Like, you know, obviously that even just to carry out that sort of gruesome way of hiding her body, it didn't seem to take a bit out of him, did it? Certainly in those interviews.
No, like he seemed to be able to live with it, despite what he was saying the opposite in interviews about, you know, how he missed her so much, and you know, we saw him in the media interviews sobbing on camera when he knew well where she was, and drying his eyes on primetime while knowing full well that she was, you know, in the hole where he had left her and sealed up with cement.
I mean, it's not everybody who does that, like, you know, who would go to those lengths to publicly sort of lie repeatedly. You know, obviously he's maintaining a manslaughter verdict. In order for a manslaughter verdict to have been reached, it would have had to show that he couldn't have known, I suppose, that whatever force was used was likely to kill her. Or that, you know, it was effectively, he couldn't have reasonably considered that.
Yeah, I think they would have been able to reach the manslaughter verdict on the basis of a partial self-defense defense. So he was saying that, well, he overused force, but he was trying to stop himself being suffering serious harm, or else that he genuinely believed the force he was using was reasonable, and it turned out not to be, according to the jury. Then that would have been manslaughter.
Yeah.
But the fact that there's no proof of how she died, and we only have this man who's been shown to be an arch manipulator and a constant purveyor of lies, we only have his version of accounts, which seems very unlikely that the way he described that she could have possibly died that way.
Yeah, and of course, like, if you just think about it, I suppose logically, how most people would react. I mean, these things, unfortunately, they happen all the time. You have these one-punch situations outside pubs where force is used and somebody dies. But often in those cases, people will effectively confess up and say, you know, I didn't, you know, hit him. I didn't think he was going to die. And that, you know, Satchwell, of course, took the totally opposite. I mean, you know, if you were honestly have to have made that mistake to then go and hide the body and bury the body and then conduct interviews, it just doesn't really add up.
Yeah, and it's something that Sarah Howard, in her victim impact statement, that she touched on as well. And she asked the court to consider not just the crime, but the cruelty that followed it, and the deception, the stolen years, and the false hope he gave all of us that one day she might turn up. And, you know, she was bringing it home, you know, how it was left as an open wound. So while he thought he literally had buried the problem, that it was an open wound for her family to still have to deal with. And like, one of the things that she said, you know, that the level of deception and the lengths that he went to. And of course, she was the lady where Satchwell had offered her the freezer in which he'd stored Tina's body. And she said, it's one of the things I don't think I'll ever overcome, is to find out that Richard Satchwell had put Tina in a chest-free freezer, and then a few days later he texted me to offer me the freezer. To hear this just horrified me, to think I could have taken it into my family home and used it. What sort of person can do that? Yeah, which is a fair question.
It is a fair question. And I mean, the only answer is somebody that's really disturbed. And, you know, that is the answer. the unusual sort of, I suppose, having listened to all the evidence, and you've done a podcast most days throughout the trial, no matter what, people will have heard bits of it or tuned into a lot of it. It depends. But really his narrative that he's put forward, that he was in some way a sort of a dominated husband, and that he was the victim of domestic violence and erratic behavior. Like, it's important to say there is no proof of that other than his own testimony. I mean, that is what we're left with. All of that, there's a very good chance none of that is true.
Yeah, and again, this is something both women in the victim impact statements touch on as well, that having a name tarnished was very difficult for them. Sarah says Richard decided to portray Tina in a way during the trial that is not true to who she was. She was not a violent person. She was caring, gentle, and loyal to those she loved. And Lorraine then, she talked about how as long as she could remember, Tina loved animals. There was always cats and dogs following Tina around. She hated seeing any animal neglected or in pain. She was so kind-hearted. I often remember myself and Tina bringing stray animals to the vet, and the vet not being able to say no to us or to turn us away. She was gentle, had a soft and loving soul. Tina's love of fashion, then she said, was kind of portrayed as a negative thing she felt throughout the trial, and that we all have our interests and likes, and it just so happened Tina's was fashion. She saved her money, spent it on clothes. She would often buy clothes for family members as presents. She didn't drink or go out, and fashion was her escape. Fashion, in a sense, she said, saved her. And that was, they were trying to put out this positive view of Tina, and she says, her presence is still with her every step she takes around Fermoy town, where she's so many happy memories, from the park to the river walks and the bridge, which she said was her catwalk. And she says, I don't think, I feel that no sentence could ever be enough for the monster that took Tina from us. How could someone claim to love and adore his wife, spread rubble from the man-made grave that he dug, and bury her in around the most special places? So he was, you just get this sense of how he just snatched this person, that was close to, she did have a family who loved her, despite their, some of the issues that were touched on or we heard about during the trial. But, they couldn't get over the fact that he, for instance, Tina's body was treated so badly, and that the dog Heidi in death got more respect because Heidi was cremated and a little shrine built for her. And it was all about him wanting to have the control, as Lorraine put it. He wanted Tina where he could still have the ultimate control within his home under the stairs. And then he put the family through the hell of not knowing what happened to Tina for years. He manipulated us as the master manipulator into believing she would one day return. And he didn't have the decency to let us have her body and mourn her death. And they'll never be able to give Richard Satchwell as a result.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting actually what they're saying there. Because I suppose, people that have maybe narcissistic personalities or that type of makeup, they often accuse others of what they are themselves. That would be a feature of it. And he's accused her really of being a violent, controlling person who exercised a degree of sort of coercive control over him. But you can see in those accusations, maybe it tells more of the truth about what he is.
Yeah, and that was striking in some of the Garda interviews, where he'd referred to things like saying, "Oh, I didn't keep her on a dog leash," or it wasn't me being controlling. She always wanted to come with me. It was very much as if I wasn't the controlling one, when no one had actually asked him, were you being controlling? That he was introducing this idea. It's like, I suppose, trying to get his retaliation in first. Yeah. I mean, we're certainly, I suppose people are speaking a bit more freely now that, the sentence and the sentence has been done, and, the conviction has come back. And the family were quite open and adamant about how she was isolated and alienated. He took her away from friends and family, which explains, the move from Fermoy, 43 miles to Youghal, away from her family. And, and he says this is to try and make her happy, because she was crying so often, and Youghal seemed to be a place where she was quite enjoyed and had, enjoyed the walks on the seaside. But again, it looks like it was yet another step for him to continue to control her.
And probably, we can only imagine. We don't know exactly the circumstances, because he's not a reliable witness, but we can only imagine that the breaking point came if a breaking point may have come if she had made that final decision to leave him.
Yeah, but we don't know, you know, because we only have there's only little patches of her final days. You know, it's casual acquaintances at the car boot sale in Rathcormac the day before on the 19th. Sarah, you know, had spoken to her like the previous Christmas, and unfortunately at the time she had fallen out with her sister Lorraine, so they weren't talking at that stage, at that point. So like, you know, it's kind of it's a shallow picture we've got of Tina. Like, you know, it's not a rounded one, unfortunately. And you know, as much as Sarah and Lorraine have done their best to try and, I suppose, redress that and give a bit of balance, so that, you know, that like the person who is at the centre of this murder trial, the victim, is voiceless, and they've tried to put some words like in her favour, because it was the trial of Richard Satchwell. But you know, but again, because of the way he conducted his cover up, to some extent, he was always trying to make a trial of Tina Satchwell, that somehow she deserved it.
Yeah, I mean, that is the Irish legal system. I mean, he's on trial against the state, effectively. We covered a case recently of Kirsty Ward, who was killed in Spain, and alongside the public prosecution, the family were bringing a prosecution simultaneously. And you get a sense of, you know, every legal system has got its advantages and disadvantages, I'd imagine, but they were able to put forward a case simultaneously, and you can see how that would be of you know, for a victim's family, how that would allow them not to suffer what Tina Satchwell's family have gone through. I mean, Richard Satchwell sat in court presumably and listened to these victim impact statements. Did he react? Did he? No,
there was no reaction. Again, like, you know, he's played a poker face the whole way through the entire process, and like, you know, and the idea of, you know, of showing any kind of hint of remorse or any kind of sense of sorrow towards the family. He had that opportunity today, you know, when he could have instructed his defence counsel to say, you know, he loved Tina, or, you know, that he understands the family loss and what he did was a terrible thing, and he can never bring her back, and he hopes that they can someday, you know, heal a bit better. And, you know, he could have said anything. He could have made some kind of proper apology, or at least any kind of apology. But the idea that he was literally sticking to his guns, that one, he was going to appeal, two, he didn't mean to kill her, and three, that she was a lovely person. If somehow she was a lovely person, those words were going to be enough to take back the character assassination that he ran in parallel after actually killing her.
And did they put forward anything else in mitigation? I mean, I don't think there's much.
No,
point,
no, there was nothing.
Yeah,
there was that was it. It was one sentence.
Yeah,
you know.
I mean, they have in other cases sometimes put forward psychological reports, or even when there is a life sentence, but that just simply didn't happen.
No, there was nothing. It was extremely brief, and I mean, it was, in a way, I mean, it must be awful for the family, because it is a kind of fairly functional end of a trial where, you know, you have that kind of recap of the events, so you're getting it's just like the opening statement. It's not going into the gruesome, you know, or granular detail of it. So at least the family are spared that. And then it's a matter of whoever is going to deliver a victim impact statement. So in this case, it was Sarah and Lorraine Howard who did it. And then it was up to the defence counsel if anything was to be said on the behalf, but it was very short. And it was up to the judge then, who said, like, it falls to him to apply the only sentence that is available to him in such cases, and that was the mandatory life sentence. And the only thing left to say then was for him to offer his condolences to the family. Yeah. And that was it. The court rose.
So, I mean, the appeal, he's obviously given notice that he wants to appeal. Are you guaranteed an appeal, or do you have to? I don't think you are really under Irish law, but I think in something like murder, you're effectively... You know,
yeah, I'm not sure on the ins and outs, but I mean, we certainly got an idea of what direction he's going to go in terms of the appeals, because we had some of the kind of the legal argument in the absence of jury, such as they'll make the argument that his reply when charged, guilty, not guilty, guilty, they'll argue that probably shouldn't have been put before the jury. Now, they may not use these. I mean, they were ruled on by the judge. Also, they asked for the murder charge to be withdrawn, and because there was no intent in evidence shown, they'll probably seek a clarification, a ruling on that as well.
Yeah.
And there's the other grounds then, where they did object at the time after the jury gone out, where the counsel for defence said that the judge's charging of the jury was basically akin to a second prosecution speech, and argued that it wasn't balanced, and the judge, he ruled on that. To say that that he rejected the argument. So I'm guessing that these will make up some of the grounds of a future appeal. I'm not quite sure exactly the rules and how it works.
Yeah.
But generally, it's going to be over points of law. It won't be over.
Won't have more witnesses.
No, there'll be nothing like that. Yeah, they won't be relitigating the evidence, but whether or not it's on a point of law, whether it should have been shown to the jury or put to the jury in the first place, and that's about it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll come back to it, no doubt, if there is an appeal, and and our condolences really to Tina's family, because it is easy to forget about them in the middle of reporting the ins and outs of a case.
Yeah, and it's something that is, as I said, where we'll move on to another story, and but they're living with this for the rest of their lives.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, Eamon.
Thank you, Niall.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.